minutes. I'm here to talk about Vietnam and doing business in Asia. So I had a video game studio in England that we started while I was at university. From there, we moved. We were a finalist in the Microsoft Imagine Cup Awards. Can you guys see the slides? Hopefully. Now they make it bigger. Ooh. Technical errors. Okay. I hope you guys can see the slides. I think you are. So, in England, we had a video game studio. We sold the IP. We won a Microsoft Imagine Cup Award in 2015. I took that little bit of money, went to China. After some analysis, figured out that Shenzhen was the best place to make video games in the world. Now it's Canada, but back then it was Shenzhen, China, which is now the Silicon Valley of Asia, apparently. I was lucky enough to give a TEDx talk in Guangzhou, which is one of the biggest. That was on blockchain and data security, but I didn't want to make this just another blockchain talk. There's quite a few of those. So yeah, I started 3 businesses that have all been quite successful, at least. And now I'm working with Stably.io, which is a stablecoin as a service. They were based out of Seattle, Washington. They opened an office in Ho Chi Minh a few months ago. I reached out to them, and now we're working together, really. So I want to start off with this quote from Donald Trump, which kind of gives you a bit of an insight into how the world perceives Vietnam. So he said, "You're talking about Vietnam," and at that time, nobody had ever heard of the country. I'm not going to do an impression. But it just kind of gives you an aspect of the Vietnam War and kind of what the global perception is of Vietnam since then. So I asked a few friends what they thought of Vietnam, and some of them said it's poor. They also said like it's a very communist. People have this misconception about China as well. A lot of people say it's corrupt, and they also said it's undeveloped, which it couldn't be further from the truth. So what I'm here to explain to everyone is that it's actually got an emerging middle class. There's a lot of high profile restaurants. I'm not too sure if any are Michelin star, but it's certainly high quality. The food is amazing. When I say corrupt, it's actually sometimes easier to grease the wheels than it is to follow the bureaucracy. It's often very confusing. Sometimes it's easier if you just pay an agent and they get things done their way, in a very Asian way, which I'll explain in a sec. It's not a communist country. It's actually very socialist. The way the government justifies this is they say it's the next step into, it's the next step towards communism. So this allows them to kind of go back towards a bit of a capitalist mindset and then go back towards communist when they need to. And it's extremely entrepreneurial. A lot of the youth, they tend to have businesses on Facebook, or they buy and sell a lot of stuff, clothes and agriculture products. So this picture kind of gives you an insight into what people think Vietnam's like. And while there is a lot of agriculture space and there's a lot of farm space and beautiful scenery in Vietnam, it's actually more like this. This is the area where we live, which is a new developed area called Vinhome Central Park. It's got a fantastic, beautiful scenery around. It's very safe. There's lots of security and video cameras. The rest of the city is susceptible to bag snatchers and people on bikes, but the Vietnamese people couldn't be more welcoming and warming. And it's just really not what people told me about before me and my wife decided to move to Vietnam. So some of the culture differences, and these don't just apply to Vietnam, these also apply to a lot of Asian countries. Family does come first. You'll find that a lot of young adults in Asia are very focused on starting a family, getting married. That also means at the age of 30, 40, they still do what the parents say. The second one is relationships. So the Chinese call it guanxi, but I don't know if I'm saying that right, but the Vietnamese people also have this kind of, in fact, a lot of places around Asia also have this it's all about friends. It's definitely not what you know, it's who you know. So this is often how a lot of deals go down. They get selected or promotions are given out. It's not necessarily how hard you work, it's often how close you are to the boss. Career is very important to a lot of young Asian people. The work ethic is very strong as well, but it's often about how it looks. So if you have a good job with a good title, we've often in my Chinese business, we've often had a lot of people reject a salary package and request a higher title, maybe senior developer, for example. And the other three are status. Again, this comes down to the title of the career. Social status is very important in China, and you can kind of see how that's bleeding out across Asia. The reason I mentioned China a lot is that it has had heavy influence on how other Asian countries do business. It's almost like a splash. As China gets a lot of wealth and industry, you can see that bleeds out to the surrounding areas. Sometimes this is due to like a trade embargo like China has against called double importing. So they'll send stuff from China to Vietnam or Malaysia, they'll repackage and then they'll send that back out. Criticism, it's important to not be too direct, which is strange considering people very often talk about the weight, how much do you earn, how much is your apartment, etc. And they'll often comment on people's beauty much more often than they would. The final thing that I want to mention about the culture difference is patience. It's very important to be patient. Sometimes you'll have several business dinners and you won't feel like things are getting done, but they really just want to see who you are and how you talk, what kind of person you are. And alcohol definitely influences this a lot. I've had many Asian potential business partners and clients just want to see how much I can drink. Okay, so the three main takeaways for doing business in Asia, we call this task system. This is transfer, adapt, and scale. So what you want to do is you want to look at ideas in the West compared to Asia. And this really has flipped on its head the past few years with a lot of, not in the past few years, sorry, before, the Asian businesses were copying the West, but now it became the West are actually copying China, which is very interesting. So you want to transfer ideas from areas that you know. You want to try and find a native co-founder that you trust. And then you want to try and use their expertise of the local marketplace to adapt that idea so it fits perfectly. Then what you want to do is you want to scale. So it's very important to remember that just like different states in the US, different regions of Asia have very different mindsets. So across China, there's very different dialects, different cultures. So it's quite important that even as you scale in one country, to be mindful that different regions still maintain very cultural traditions that you might not find. So the north and south of the country would be very different. Okay, so moving forward, the four main industries in Vietnam, we can see that this is where a lot of the foreign investment is going. The first is property. Manufacturing and the production industries are definitely getting a lot more foreign investment. This might be due to a cheaper human workforce, but as robotics, etc., move up the supply chain or down the supply chain, we're going to see a lot of these other countries surrounding China prosper as these manufacturing facilities transfer over. The second is infrastructure. While Vietnam definitely lacks a lot of developments outside the cities, even in the cities, utilities like water, electricity, and internet are still being updated. Sometimes it can be frustrating, but at the same time, it's hard to kind of forget. You see this metropolis, this brand new metropolis, you kind of forget like the infrastructure isn't really up to standards. Okay, and the next one is fintech. They reckon fintech's going to be about 8 billion plus over, I think it's 2021 next year. This includes mobile wallets and payments, which kind of are hard to adapt. Vietnamese people don't tend to trust banks because of, obviously during the war, etc. Monies and assets wasn't really safe. So it's kind of hard to find user adoption for mobile wallets. And payments, etc. Although there's a lot of e-commerce sites that are kind of pushing this, and there is a lot more adoption with the youth, but the kind of 30 plus are definitely finding it a bit hard. It's not as widespread as China, for example, or even North America, but it's definitely rising. EVD is electronic value distribution. So to top up my phone, it's very difficult for me as a foreigner to do this with a bank account and an app. I still need to go to a store like a 7-Eleven and purchase $3 or $4 for my phone top up. And the last one is technology. There's definitely a huge rise in outsourcing development of low to mid-level technology. Vietnam, in my opinion, is definitely a founder's dream. The low cost of living, low cost of workforce, and high talent is definitely up there with Thailand 10, 15 years ago. Okay, so here's just some facts and data. So on the left, you can see a report from the Asian Track XXN, the Asian Business Report. Vietnam is actually number 2 in Southeast Asia for fintech investment, behind Singapore. So Singapore is 51% and Vietnam is 36%. This blew my mind when I first read it. You definitely don't expect that, but when you hear and you start to network, you definitely get a feel for a lot of these businesses that are cropping up. There's definitely a lot of Singapore investment into Vietnam, but you can see on the graph on the right that it's actually a lot is Korea. So Korea and Japan are definitely big on property developments in Vietnam. So I'll also post a link to this after the talk, so anyone can jump on and find the sources. If there's nothing, you can also contact me. That's at the end as well. So unfortunately, we do have to talk about the pandemic. But what's interesting to see is Vietnam only had around 300 cases of COVID-19, 260 recovered, and 0 deaths. The reason behind this, I'll explain in a little bit, but compare that to America, which is 1,450,000 recently. That's definitely, you know, in comparison. I mean, obviously North America is much bigger, but the proximity to China of Vietnam is what a lot of countries expected Vietnam to fail, because they just don't expect Vietnam to be this huge powerhouse or this huge economy just yet. So how they did this was what I've conduced into 4 steps. So they acted fast, definitely. They didn't hesitate. They already had this experience from China with SARS and MERS and H1N1, where they actually had to cull the majority of chickens and birds, etc., in Vietnam. Now, bird collecting is quite a big hobby for older men in Vietnam. So the H1N1 had a huge effect because there's a lot of very expensive birds and there's a lot of hobbyists. So it definitely had a big morale strike. So I just don't think that the new medical advisor or health advisor to Vietnam was messing around this time. So they closed the borders, they restricted the trade, and they monitored all the people coming in and out. When they started to get a few more cases and the world started to wake up, they stopped issuing new visas and they completely closed travel borders. Then they did a social lockdown since February. My mother actually came to Vietnam the 10th to the 24th, and everyone was wearing masks. You couldn't enter malls, etc., with masks. Then when she left towards the end of February, that's when the social lockdown happened. So they closed businesses, they shut down bars, and they were heavily monitoring a lot of the foreigners that were coming into and out of Vietnam. And then just recently, they actually removed a lot of the restrictions and they allow a lot of business to operate with conditions. So it's essentially the same as a lot of other countries are doing. You have a restaurant that used to hold 60 people, now they can only hold 30. Cinemas are still closed, and big parties and clubs and events definitely limited in terms of entrance, like admission numbers. So I want to end with a couple of images that help summarize Asia versus Western business behavior. This is more about cultural differences, and some of you may have seen these images before, but they're actually really good at explaining what the kind of mentality is. So the left in blue is the West, and the red in the right is China, but it's also Asia. You'll see a lot of these cultural, a lot of these cultural differences definitely apply across Asia versus the West. So the first one is the senior figure or the boss title. In the West, it's very common to have open workspaces. Everybody's on the same opinion. In Asia, it's very much the boss or the Laoban has the final say on everything. He's expected to lead the team. People are expected to do what they're told. It's not really a case of, let's go together. It's very much a case of do what I say and not as I do. So the next is how Asia tends to deal with problems. They don't really confront them head on. In the West, it's very easy for us to go to team members or our boss and say, hey, I don't think that's a good idea. Even if there's an issue with like a property that you rent, you don't really just text them and say, hey, you need to fix this, unless things get very out of hand. It's called losing face. A lot of us are probably familiar with this. So in Asia, it's very often to just kind of circumvent the issue and just kind of hint at the problem. A lot of cultures around Asia are used to this, and they'll understand what's happening. But as a Westerner going to Asia, you kind of have to pick up on these little social nuances. The next one is punctuality. This one might not really apply to Vietnam. It's almost important to be on time, but a lot of Vietnamese friends, when you're meeting them, will tend to be late. In business, it's quite important to be punctual. But in Asia, most of Asian countries, the time tends to be, you know, if you say 2 o'clock, it could be 1:45 to 2:15. Okay, the next one is networking. This is what we were talking about with Guanxi. So networking in the West is normally, oh, I know this guy, let me introduce you to this guy, you know, and if you know someone, it's more about hitting them up and saying, hi, do you have any cannabis-friendly banks in California, et cetera, et cetera. In Asian countries, it's definitely Guanxi. It's all about everyone knowing each other. Who knows, who knows the senior position. Oh, I've got a guy that I can introduce you to. Oh, my friend does medical supplies. He'll be able to sort it out for you. I've got a friend in export. He'll give you a good rate. The next one is talking about money. Again, as I said before, it's not best to be direct with criticism, but if you want to know something about someone, feel free to go ahead. The amount of times a taxi driver has asked me, like, how much do you earn? How much do you pay for rent? It's just phenomenal. And the other one is always talking what you're thinking. It's you don't really just call a spade, right? When they see people, they kind of just say they say just without thinking. And then it can often lead to a bit of conflict, but Asian people tend to be more understanding of, because there's a translation issue. So it's very common for people to kind of get mixed up and not exactly say what's on their mind. But this is still a very Asian kind of trait, which kind of leads on to the next one. It doesn't lead on to the next one at all. So yeah, basically, the previous one was just about how people tend to not say what's on their mind. So this is actually a difference in transportation. So in the West, there's things like Lyft and Uber. Asian countries have things like Grab and Didi, but it's how the personal transportation gets around. So in the West, we're going very conscious on green electricity. While they're focusing on green electricity, in the West, they've definitely adopted gas in cars a lot more. So it's interesting to see the evolution of how people have personal transportation around different countries. In the countryside, it's still kind of similar with people using bikes. In Vietnam, everyone uses a bike. In China, it's kind of perceived as being quite low. To have a bike is considered to be quite countryside and not really cultured. So the other one that we're going to talk about is expressing anger. This is what I thought was next. They'll never tell you exactly if there's a problem. They'll just kind of keep it to themselves and mull over it. In the West, we tend to, if we have a problem, we tend to be quite direct about it. So in Asia, it's very important to keep, not concerns, but keep issues to yourself. Don't reveal them to many people. Because again, it's about Guanxi, and you never know who knows who. So if you have a concern, don't voice it. Just kind of think about it and understand that it might be a translation issue, or it might just be a simple culture issue. The next one is really about lifestyle. So in the West, we'll tend to go home, stick on Netflix, relax, maybe order some takeout. In Asia, it's definitely social circle focused. So you'll always see people hanging out with friends. It's very common for them to go out. One of my friends described this from China as being most people don't really have big houses, especially in Hong Kong. So what they'll do is they'll rent KTV spaces, which have nice seats. They can order drinks and stuff. So it's more about celebrating with others compared to the West, which is very much, I'm going to go home and eat ice cream and watch Netflix. The second one is how they treat newcomers. So in the West, we tend to have cliques and stuff, and this might seem like a very immature way of treating new people. But in Asia, it's very much like, look at this guy, he's new, let's celebrate. So once you arrive and you start to build a social circle, you'll find a lot of people will invite you to everything, and it might be really tiresome at first, but just know that these few steps in the beginning of when you arrive in an Asian country will definitely be beneficial. And the more people you meet, it will open your network up and you'll be introduced to more people. The next one is self-portrayal. So Westerners, we're tend to raise to be, you know, like self-confident, America number one. It's all about mental positivity. Whereas in Asia, people are taught to be modest, and they're taught humility. So being very self-aware is quite common in Asia. Again, this all comes down to losing face. No one will want to kind of shout in an argument or show their true feelings, as they say. The next one is how we treat seniors. So in the West, when say, you know, say a parent has got older and they need help, it's very common for us to put them in a home because we think they need a lot more care. Whereas in Asia, you'll find that there are very few homes, like senior citizen homes, and they'll actually remain with the family, you know, right until they pass. They also have very involved in the younger generation's life. They tend to look after the grandchildren while the parents go to work and stuff. So it's a very senior citizen prioritized countries. We see this in Japan, in China, Vietnam, Cambodia. So it's very easy to forget these traits. And I think that's something that we can adopt from the West as well. So the next one is all about how people see bringing up children. In the West, it's very common to see parents have a job and put the child in daycare, or even the grandparents will look after them and while the parents work. In Asia, it's the same, but it's very common to just give the full responsibility to the grandparents. This can even come down to discussions of the children's future. Who do they marry? What do they need to study in university? So the generations definitely have an input in terms of how to raise the child. Next is parties. So you'll see in the West, people will tend to have a conversation with 2-3 people around a room. In Asian countries, it's all about one big table. Everyone's here together. Let's get to know. So Asian cultures and countries definitely have the best party games, in my opinion, especially drinking games. Like, I don't think any other culture does it around the world. The next one is, this is giving opinions. So the way that we give opinions in the West is very A to B. This is my idea. What do you think? In Asia, we tend to navigate and kind of skirt and beat around the bush and go every other way that we can. So in Asian countries, I've found that while there's a lot of people that do appreciate it, there's definitely a certain knack to navigating an Asian workplace. What I've personally found working in Asia is it's not only to challenge myself, it's allowed me to adapt to very difficult situations very quickly. And to be honest, I'm the kind of person that thrives on a challenge. There's a lot of expats, especially Westerners, that move to Asia, around anywhere in Asia, Southeast Asia. They just can't really handle it and they tend to complain a lot. This often comes to a division between expats. You know, if you don't like it, go home. But if you're the kind of person that likes a challenge and you definitely can adapt to new situations, then I would highly recommend doing business in Southeast Asia. Vietnam has very pleasantly surprised me coming from China. I was in China for 5 years. We only moved to Vietnam last year, me and my wife. We actually were deciding to move to America or Vietnam, and we didn't really know what to expect. So we come here for a few months and we just absolutely fell in love. It's just been absolutely phenomenal. So I'll post this in the group in a sec. I'm Warren Burke. I'm currently working with Stably.io, or a stablecoin as a service company. They're based out of Seattle. They have some fantastic products, an amazing team, and some fantastic investments through certain VC funds. Highly recommend you guys check them out. And if you haven't visited Vietnam yet, please do. If you have any questions about Vietnam or doing business in Asia, please let me know. Okay. How do let me open the chat. No questions. Cool. Uh, yeah. Just Felix. What's your talk on Felix? Oh, I can't unmute you. Sorry.
Hey, sorry, yeah. Can you hear me now?
I
No,
can't hear you.
I'm just listening in. I'm just listening in. Well, it's interesting to just be part of it. I don't have a talk.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I think I actually caught your talk last week, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I
Yeah,
was
yeah, yeah.
presenting. We're doing. I'm in the crypto world, and yeah, we're doing also fundraisings here in
Oh,
Switzerland. We're in Switzerland, and we're doing fundraising for companies. With security token offerings, and this
are
is.
you aware of Stably IO?
Sorry.
Are you aware of the company Stably?
Stably, until now, no. Until
They're
this speech, I was not.
their speciality is actually stable coins as a service. So they're
Yeah,
actually focusing on regulation and fintech. You know, they're not a blockchain company. They just use blockchain to solve a lot of problems.
exactly.
But one of the things they do is tokenization. Tokenization is definitely a hot topic these days.
It is absolutely, and I think it came quite a long way in the last 2 years, right? Or especially in the last year, some things finally got done with the regulators,
Yeah,
and especially now in the last half year, there's more and more STOs coming up. Which is great. If you look at IPOs, you've got an IPO every day, so there's, the
yeah,
market the
that is
potential is
true.
just infinitely big. And especially since we are able to do this for companies, like our focus on small and medium-sized companies. So, for growth financing and this and that,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
not the too
Is
crazy startups.
how how is Switzerland feel about stablecoins?
Stable coins, well, that Libra is here in Switzerland. They are based in Geneva. That's where they created their hub now.
Yeah,
And of course, well, with Libra as always, with Libras the opinions go so far apart as I have not seen on any other stable coin.
yeah.
But it's, of course, it is a very, very important part, whether you like it or not, for this industry, because, of course, because of its backing and because of its access to this incredible amount of people that they can contact and that might use it. Who knows how successfully, but and so I think
I
it's
think
very
that's part
good.
of the concern with Libra. To be honest, they're worried that Libra could potentially cause some economies to become unstable. No.
Well, it is, I don't want to speak for Libra or against Libra. Now, it will be interesting to see what kind of a fiat basket they come up with, if they still want to stick with that, or how that's going to be. Because, I come from traditional capital markets. I come from investment banking. And I
Yeah,
know how many times, like if you just look at an institutional investor, right? You take the
yeah,
best setup that you can. You take a pension fund in, I don't know, in Sweden or Norway. Those are the big guys. Now they have, of course, they've got a part of their FX exposure in Corona, in their local prime currency, of course. And then the rest they need to split up, and they need to somehow look at, okay, how am I investing now? My investments, what is in US dollars, what is in euros, what is in yen, and what is so on, so forth, because you always have an FX risk. Now you can
yeah.
hedge that FX risk out, and I come from structuring those kind of products, so that was we knew how to handle that situation. But it costs, of course, the hedging costs you, depending on the setup. Sometimes it's only 0.5% per year. Sometimes it can go up to 2 or 3% per
Yeah,
year.
yeah.
And with some developing countries' currency, it's, of course, you cannot really hedge it. It doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, this is where
So yeah,
I think this is where a lot of arbitrage comes in for sure. This is what a lot of people are doing with stable coins. I personally think regulation isn't something to be afraid of. There's a lot of Bitcoin maximalists out there that will disagree with me. But yeah, I think for it to move forward, regulation is unfortunately a key aspect.
absolutely. I see it the same way. Um, all the criticism of the blockchain industry, of Bitcoin, of Tether, of Monero, of Zcash, all that is there for a good reason. And I am a supporter of almost all these currencies, but with a certain limitations. And,
Yeah.
the regulation is there for a good reason. That they are sometimes overdoing it, of course. Yeah, I mean, that's unfortunately, how regulators work. But still, it's, yeah, I think it's part of it.
I think, I don't know if
Now,
Ida Maduako.
Ariel, hi Ariel. I think we're still waiting for Jide should be the next participant.
Yeah, I'm not too sure if he's here. Anyway, guys, thank you very much. It was a pleasure. I hope you enjoy the rest of the unconference.